Hey, everybody, welcome back into the Frogs Up TCU Sports Podcast, episode 10, recording this evening, our midweek episode. We have a big game coming up this weekend. TCU getting ready to take on the West Virginia Mountaineers in Big 12 play. It's always a good matchup when the Frogs and the Mountaineers get together. A blackout game coming up this weekend at Amon G Stadium, 7 p.m. Saturday night. TCU rolling out the all-black uniforms for the first time this year. It's going to be a good one. Both teams coming in at 3-1, also 1-0 in the conference. TCU, of course, picking up a win over Houston, and West Virginia taking down Texas Tech last weekend to open up conference play. We will preview that matchup, tell y'all everything you need to know for this contest between the Horned Frogs and the Mountaineers. And we'll also take a quick look at what's coming up in the Big 12 this weekend and discuss the TCU basketball news that dropped earlier this week with the schedules. The Big 12 conference schedules have been released for both the men's and the women's programs. We will give our thoughts about that. I am Russ Hodges. That is Anthony North. Anthony, I had a really nice day today out at a golf regional. It was great weather. Had a chance to just chill out, shoot some pictures, do a couple interviews. The Rochelle program here, they had a couple of kids qualify out of the regional. So a positive news day today. How's things hanging down there in Texas?
Oh yeah, man. It was a very busy work week out here. So I've been on my grind with the day job, but it's all good. And yeah, looking, I'm already a little bit of the jealous girlfriend meme, looking over my shoulder at the basketball schedule, kind of thinking about, okay, yeah, football, that's cool. I'm excited for this basketball stuff too. I think the Big 12 is going to be crazy exciting. So ready to get into all of that. And yeah, this West Virginia game should be a good one. So looking forward to it tonight.
And of course, this episode is brought to y'all by our friends at Charlie Hustle Clothing Company. Charlie Hustle, vintage made fresh. Go online to charliehustle.com. Get your TCU swag, get your Big 12 conference swag. Use the promo code FROGSOWAR for 15% off all TCU items. Or if you want to support any of the other programs in the Big 12, use the promo code 101215. That's promo code TEN1215 for 15% off all non-sale items. Our partnership with On It Athlete, the trading cards, the TCU Horned Frog trading cards are launching next week. Pre-sales are open right now. If you don't know what's going on with On It Athlete, it's really exciting. Partnering with about 40 different colleges and universities this fall, including TCU. Check out our Facebook and Twitter at Frogs of War for more information. Pre-sales are open right now. We have a referral link that's been posted to our social media and our website at frogsofwar.com. October 2nd is when the packs are officially launching. $12.99 each, 33% of all revenue going to NIL. So if you want to support the Horned Frogs and TCU Athletics, be sure to check that out. Also, the Patreon is live via the 1012 network if y'all want to support the two of us here on the Frogs Up podcast or any of the other podcasts involved with the 1012 network. They all do fantastic work. Please consider donating to the Patreon. Go to patreon.com/1012 network. That's patreon.com/TEN12 network. All right, TCU West Virginia. Feels like every time these two teams play, it's a battle. There have been a few games that have resulted in game-winning field goals. I think back to the Jaden Oberchrome game winner in Morgantown a lot. The Josh Boyce 2-point conversion reception to give TCU a come-from-behind win there. Also in Morgantown, I think that was all the way back in 2012, TCU's first year in the Big 12. I remember I was a freshman at TCU, and I was coming back maybe from the Blue or somewhere, and I was watching that game in the lobby, and I got really psyched when Boykin rolled out and found Josh Boyce for that two-pointer. It's been a really good matchup between these two teams. It feels like every time they play, it's a one-possession game or maybe a little bit more than that. Last season, TCU came out on top 41-31. Max Duggan throwing a touchdown pass at the very end of that game to put the icing on the cake there. But Anthony, this is a West Virginia team that is playing some pretty good football right now. 3-1 on the season, 1-0 in the Big 12, picking up a win over Texas Tech, and had previously beaten Pittsburgh 17-6 in that backyard brawl contest. So this is a bit of a different group. No JT Daniels this year, no Bryce Ford Wheaton, but still some really talented players on the squad. So overall, what have you just taken away from what you've seen from the Mountaineers so far this year.
Yeah, I think that this team has definitely overachieved already from what are, I think, the national low expectations for them. I mean, I think they were picked very last in the Big 12 in the preseason poll. So, or at least among the lowest teams in the conference. And so already with a conference win over a team picked in the top 5 in the conference, is a big achievement. Winning that rivalry game is an achievement, and yeah, they've done it with big time defense, a running game, and very very little passing game. So it's been interesting. I mean, yeah, taking on Penn State in that season opener is a really tough game, and they did get beat down a little bit there. But Penn State is a top 10 team and is going to be a national player throughout the season. So I don't think there's too much shame in dropping that one. And yeah, I think just the surprise of them being in contention at all in these games. I think there were a lot of people who thought Neil Brown had a chance to not even make it to this TCU game as head coach. I think that it was very much on the table that they would be 1-3 sitting at this spot rather than 3-1. So an overachieving group to this point, and a very dangerous team in the way that they're able to grind out these games. I mean, very low scoring games, very few possessions, and shutting down some of these offenses. I mean, obviously, last week with Texas Tech, Tyler Show gets hurt, and that's unfortunate. But obviously, Texas Tech is really big on Baron Morton as well. So they to be able to stop that offense from scoring a whole bunch and to come away with that win, you have to be impressed with what they've done defensively, and I think it'll cause TCU some problems on Saturday.
Yeah, we have a Frogs of War roundtable that's going to be coming out here in the next day or so about this West Virginia contest. And one of the questions that was posed to each of us was, where do we put West Virginia right now in the Big 12 power rankings, I guess you'd say. And I think right now West Virginia, as you said, Anthony, has really outperformed expectations. I think coming in, we would expect West Virginia to be at the bottom of the conference at this point in the season. And that hasn't been the case. I think right now they look better than Oklahoma State. I think they look better than Houston. I think they look better than Cincinnati. I put them really in the middle portion of the conference right now. And they may not have the skill talent that necessarily sticks out, but they play really physical. That's one thing that I've come to expect about West Virginia is they're going to play really physical, especially in the trenches. And for a TCU team that kind of struggled a little bit on the line of scrimmage against SMU last weekend, it's going to be a even tougher test against West Virginia this weekend. So both teams obviously looking to move to 2-0 in the conference and stay near the top of those conference standings. So looking at this West Virginia offense, kind of unknown at the quarterback spot. Garrett Green did not play last weekend. He's the starting quarterback, but he's banged up with an injury. The backup quarterback came in and helped lead that team to a win again, 20-13 at home against Texas Tech. Nico Martial, I think is I'm sorry if I butchered that name, but a young quarterback, relatively unproven player, but CJ Donaldson is an established back and is a very good player. I think is going to be the biggest player for TCU to stop. And looking at that SMU contest last weekend, we know that the Mustangs ran the ball really well in the first half. They had over 100 rushing yards in the first half. TCU did make the necessary adjustments. They were able to slow down that rushing offense in the second half, but West Virginia, when they can get going downhill with CJ Donaldson and some of those other backs, they grind out the game clock. And I think part of the battle is going to be getting the TCU offense on the field, because I think if West Virginia is able to methodically move the ball down the field with some of these timely possessions, they'd be winning the battle really in two ways: by wearing down the TCU defense, but also keeping Chandler Morris and that TCU offense that's going to play with tempo and rack up a lot of yards. They'd be keeping that offense off the field. And that's half the battle. So, Anthony, what are you looking for from this West Virginia offense, and what's going to be the biggest key for TCU to hold that offense to a minimum this weekend?
Yeah, it is. The team is missing that star power outside of Donaldson. I mean, I think Donaldson is definitely a guy who can take over a game, and they have a couple of backs behind him, and the QB run game they've used to some pretty good effect too. But um, yeah, the wide receivers, there's no Caden Prather. He's at Maryland now, I think. Bryce Ford Wheaton's in the NFL. So yeah, like you said, those skill positions at least don't have the known entities, those kind of star names that you can point to and say, all right, there's the battle that you got to go win. The battle will be at the line of scrimmage, stopping CJ Donaldson. And I think it will be a challenge for TCU, particularly if Johnny Hodges misses again, as he was out with the injury last week against SMU. That puts a lot of pressure on Shad Banks and Jamoy Hodge to step up and kind of backfill that role to uh, get in there and make those stops, those tackles for loss, and controlling the line of scrimmage, maintaining discipline there too. Because yeah, I don't know a whole lot about Nico Martial or really Garrett Green either, but their stats on the season, they've been pretty effective running the ball when it's come down to that, and that's been the way they've been able to really grind through some of these games. Is they go and pick up first downs, they go and get big runs. So um, maintaining that discipline against this offense and stopping the line of scrimmage. I mean, it'll be a big test for the 3-3-5 stack of Joe Gillespie too, because I think it's better against the run than people think, or than you may think, considering there's only 3 down linemen. But we haven't seen a team like this at all this season for TCU. The stat I pulled for that roundtable that'll go up later this week, uh, TCU's opponents this season have averaged 40 pass attempts per game. West Virginia comes into this game averaging 20 pass attempts per game. Part of that is there's just far fewer plays per game because they're running the ball and it's grinding it out. But that's just not their game. They're not throwing the ball all over the field, and they're unique in that way. It's not quite like playing against an Air Force or Army or something like that, but it is a very different mindset that you have to go into the game, knowing that you really just have to keep that physicality for the full length of the regulation to be able to come away with the win and slow and get that offense off the field. And a lot of that goes, and I know we'll get into the offense here, but it goes to the offense. The offense has to be successful in its tempo, the TCU offense. If you're going to be running that tempo and you're off the field in 20 seconds, if you're going 3 and out, it's going to be things can roll out of hurry, or at least West Virginia will be able to burn so much clock that they will remain in this game longer than maybe they should if that TCU offense kind of, yeah, you're running tempo, you want to run a whole lot of plays, but if you're not picking up first downs, you're not able to. So I think if we're moving on to the offense, I think that's where a key will be to taking West Virginia out of its game. Is you got to be successful in your tempo. If that's going to be the way that TCU intends to play on Saturday, it has to work, or things could fall apart in a hurry.
On the injury front, you mentioned Johnny Hodges. I know Sonny Dykes said last week that he's week to week with that hand injury. So it sounds like something that may sort of linger throughout most of the season. Hopefully, he will be back on the field. I know he was out there against Houston playing with that ball club on his hand. He wasn't playing last weekend against SMU, but Shad Banks did do a nice job of filling in there. And those linebackers are going to have a heavy task with stopping that run offense for West Virginia. And then for the TCU offense, Jack Besh and Dylan Wright did not play against SMU. Sonny Dykes said earlier this week that it sounds like they are trying to slowly work those guys back into the fold. So maybe they get a little bit of action this weekend, but it sounds like we might get a heavy dose of Jalen Robinson and Jared Wiley and a couple other guys this weekend for that passing offense, which has looked really good over these last few weeks. Chandler Morris is playing with a lot of confidence. We've talked about that several times on this podcast, but Anthony, as you said, with this tempo, TCU's got to finish drives, and this is not really a new point. Um, this is going to be a really physical West Virginia defense, and on the other side of it, West Virginia is going to be looking to wear you out with those lengthy offensive drives on their end. So for TCU, I'd really like to see the offense turn the corner. I know it's been written about in the media this week as well that TCU is putting up a lot of yards and they're moving the football, but they're just not cashing in on scoring opportunities. So it's something that it seems like the coaches are aware of it, the players are aware of it, and we'll see if this is the weekend where the offense finally turns the corner. But Anthony, looking at this West Virginia defense, this is a unit that held Pittsburgh to only 6 points and forced several turnovers in that matchup, and then came right back last weekend, held Texas Tech, which is a program that's capable of putting up a lot of points, to only 13. And granted, Tyler Shaw did suffer an injury in that game. It sounds like it's a fractured fibula, and he's going to have surgery, likely be out for the year. That's a terrible break for the Red Raiders. But Baron Morton came in, and maybe he was just rusty, or maybe it was something the West Virginia defense was doing. But he was like 1 of 7 passing to come out of the gate, and he's a little bit of a dual threat quarterback as well. But he didn't play all that well in relief of Tyler Shaw. And outside of Taj Brooks, who was kind of going Greg Jennings Superman mode for Texas Tech in this game, he had almost 30 carries. He had well over 100 yards. He was getting the ball on 5 or 6 consecutive carries there at the end of the game. It ultimately wasn't enough to beat West Virginia. So I think it's a little encouraging that the Red Raiders did have some success running the ball. And TCU, as we know, has done a really good job of that. Over 200 rushing yards against Colorado, over 200 against Houston, and just under 200 against SMU. So, Anthony, what are going to be the keys to exploiting this West Virginia defense? What do they do well, and how does TCU sort of crack that code?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to see where TCU will fall in the scale of things here. I find it hard to imagine Chandler Morris having as bad a game as Phil Dracovic did against West Virginia, where he threw 3 interceptions and had something like 80 yards passing. And then, Baron Morton had 37 pass attempts and only completed 13 of them for like 130 something yards. It was those two who are, I think not elite quarterbacks, but are capable quarterbacks, have shown to be capable, and West Virginia really shut them down. So I would like to think that Chandler Morris is not on that side of things. I think that this offense will scheme things up and give him every opportunity to succeed. Where Drew Aller for Penn State in the first week of the season threw 3 touchdown passes, threw for a ton of yards. They also ran the ball pretty efficiently too. They're 2-star running backs there for Penn State. I don't know that Amani Bailey and Trey Sanders are to the level of Katron Allen and Nick Singleton for Penn State, but it's a very strong 1-2 punch possibility there, with Bailey having really gone supernova here, taken off. So I think if it will most likely be that run game that makes it happen, because that's really what we've seen work against this West Virginia offense the last few weeks. Though, those 2 teams, prolific scoring potential out of those 2 teams to put up 19, 17, something like that total points between them is the West Virginia offense has certainly, or defense has certainly impressed, and TCU will have its challenge there. I think we got to see that, similar to how TCU attacked the SMU defense, where those tight ends are going to get opportunities, and then hopefully, I'd like to see Chandler Morris take some more shots as well. I think that Warren Thompson might have some opportunities, and we keep talking about Savion. Let's see Savion make it happen here. Um, let's go attack this defense and put up some points to be able to not allow West Virginia to get into that grinded out game, because if you're not scoring and you let them hang around, the clock's just going to keep on ticking, and it'll get late early. So I guess that's my analysis on the offense. Score points, please.
Savion has been unfortunately kind of a ghost for TCU's offense this season, and maybe that's just a product of transitioning from Garrett Riley to Kendall Briles and running more RPO stuff. And it's an offense that doesn't rely as much on taking those deep shots, which is where Savion Williams kind of excels with his 6'5" frame and winning jump balls, taking advantage of matchups against smaller defenders. Hopefully we can see Savion get it going in some fashion this weekend, because I think against SMU he only had one touch. He didn't have a target. His one touch was a reverse that went for 0 yards. So hopefully he can find his role in this offense. And speaking of players to watch, that was another question posed to all of us in our roundtable. Who are going to be the offensive, defensive MVPs, the biggest players to watch? For me, I'm going to be looking at Shad Banks, filling in possibly again for Johnny Hodges. Even if he's not starting, he's probably going to get a fair amount of snaps, and he's going to be one of those linebackers that's tasked with filling those gaps and containing this West Virginia run offense. So I'm going to be looking for Shad Banks, hopefully to have a big game. And then on the offensive side, I picked Jalen Robinson because I think Jalen Robinson, TCU's offense, as far as the receivers are concerned, I feel like you don't really have that alpha yet. We thought maybe coming into the season it might be Savion Williams. It hasn't been the case, but I feel like Jalen Robinson has separated himself a little bit over these last few weeks as the player that's going to draw a majority of the target share. And I think he's made some big plays. He had the 3rd and 14 reception in the SMU game that went for 16 yards and a first down. He's a versatile player. You can use him on the outside. You can use him in a run play or a jet toss behind the line of scrimmage. I think you can line him up in the slot. He's got a lot of speed. I think he's going to continue to take a step forward and get more comfortable in his first year with the program and have a solid game this weekend. So, Anthony, who are going to be your biggest difference makers for TCU? Who needs to step up and play well to help the Frogs get this win and move to 4-1 on the season?
Yeah, I haven't written up my roundtable answers yet, so I'm a little bit on the fly here. But I think defensively, I'm looking up front, probably Dom Williams in the middle there to take up space and cause havoc, get some tackles for loss, and force that West Virginia run game and CJ Donaldson to try to bounce things outside and then let Johnny Hodges or Jamoy Hodge or whomever is out there go clean up. So I think that's where I'm looking, is somebody up front to eat up space, and Dominic Williams is probably that guy to make things happen there up front, to make the run game difficult for West Virginia on Saturday. Because if they're getting push up front and finding space to run, they'll be able to take advantage of TCU. So Dom Williams eating up space up front is probably a big key there. Offensively, I think it's probably the offensive line. I don't know that I'm calling out one particular player, but I think the offensive line here is going to need to continue to step up and protect Chandler and get out there in space when that's necessary, and then making space for the run game. I think last season one thing we talked about was each week it felt like TCU was leveling up on its competition like a video game towards a boss when it came to dual threat running capable quarterbacks. I think this season it's doing that a little bit with defenses. I think the defenses keep getting a little bit better each week. Um, Obviously, Chandler had the 2 interceptions in week 1, but I'm of the mind that Houston and SMU actually have better defenses talent wise than Colorado's. And I think this West Virginia defense is another level up from that. Its defensive front is strong and capable. And so I think the offensive line holding up to that and letting the offense actually work is going to be key. And again, we've talked about it now for weeks, the penalties. We just can't have,
Mhm.
this is a home game. You're in your home environment. There's no excuses to have procedure penalties or offsides penalties at all. A delay of game penalties, and then holding penalties, stuff like that happens, but they can be real drive killers. So I think we're putting it on the offensive line to keep things clean and let this offense work, and maybe the overall execution is better, and you find your way into the end zone more often.
Yeah, TCU right now is averaging what seems to be about 6 or 7 penalties a game, and a
Hmm.
lot of these early games this season have been at home, and that's just not going to cut it against good football teams. Whether it's Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas State, or West Virginia, Iowa State, BYU. So TCU's got to continue to clean that up. And as we get into our predictions here, I'm going to be fairly conservative with mine. I feel like throughout most of my predictions, SMU, Houston, Colorado, I've been very lopsided with TCU putting up a lot of points and the defense not giving up a lot of points. But I'm going to be more conservative with this prediction just because knowing the history of this particular matchup and how many close games these two teams have played, West Virginia is just one of those teams where it doesn't seem to matter what their record is or what kind of players they got out there. Much like Kansas, they always play TCU close. And so I'm going to go with a fairly conservative prediction here. TCU, of course, coming out with a win. 27-14 is my prediction. I believe the spread is 11 points, which seems pretty fair coming in. Maybe a little generous by a couple points, given that both teams are 3-1 and 1-0 in the conference. But I think TCU wins pretty comfortably at home. West Virginia's defense will put up a little more resistance than TCU has faced this year, but 27-14 is my final score prediction here. TCU moving to 4-1 on the season.
Yeah, I similarly have a 13-point win. I've got TCU winning 30-17. I think that yeah, the spread on this one has been pretty weird. I think it opened some places at like 13 and a half, quickly dove way down to about 9 and a half at a lot of places. And then now it's settling in around 11, 12, 12 and a half. So I think we're kind of right on where the market is on this one, thinking that TCU is just under a 2 touchdown favorite here. And which I agree. I'm a little bit surprised that that the number has settled like that, because I think that's just residual. People think West Virginia is terrible.
Mhm.
I mean, TCU was only a 6.5 point favorite over SMU last week, and I think West Virginia is a somewhat significantly better in the key positions, in where it matters up front on both sides. So that's a little bit curious. Maybe it's a little respect to TCU. Maybe it's a little marketplace disrespect to West Virginia. But um, I do think TCU is held to a relatively low point total here. Um, but as well, I don't know, barring some really bad interceptions for touchdowns, or fumble, scoop and scores, or special teams things, I don't know that this West Virginia offense is going to be able to score that many points against the TCU defense. Um, I don't. They're not going to sling it all over the field. Now, Donaldson is absolutely capable of putting up 150 yards and 3 touchdowns on TCU. That
Mhm.
is definitely within the scope of outcomes here. Um, but Yeah, I'm going with the Frogs by 13. And before we move off of this, I'll say on these games have been exciting in the past. You know, I kind of open with the Neil Brown was on the hot seat, but he was pretty dominant against TCU against Gary Patterson.
Correct.
He was 3-0 against Gary Patterson. So this West Virginia had a pretty significant winning streak going into last season against the Horned Frogs, and TCU comes away with that victory that I think ended up 10 points on the scoreboard, but only because of a fourth down. You can just probably pick up a first down and kneel out the play and you win by 3, but instead you toss a, a touchdown to Savion Williams there to kind of rub the score up a little bit. But yeah, I think these teams have had some fun battles. They've also had some really unfun battles. I think it was the 2019 game, end of the season. TCU
Mhm.
might have needed a win to get to a bowl game, and
Yep.
TCU played just terrible. It was like kind of rainy and misty in Fort Worth, and um, yeah, West Virginia has come to Fort Worth and played really well in the past too.
Yep.
I mean, there's the classic Trevon Boykin runs around and gives Dana Holgerson a high five on the sideline game. But really, outside of that, West Virginia has done a good job coming into Amon G. Carter Stadium and putting up a really strong performance. So, um, yeah, I have every expectation that the Frogs will be in for a fight on Saturday night, and it should be a fun one. But let's see a Horned Frog victory for sure.
And be sure to wear all black to the Carter this weekend. Protect the Carter. If you're in the student section, you're going to be rocking those black t-shirts that ADJD was showing off on
They
Twitter
look pretty
earlier
sweet.
today.
Yeah.
So wear your black. It's going to be a great atmosphere, a night game at Amon G. Carter, 7 p.m. kickoff, TCU, West Virginia. One of multiple Big 12 games that are being played this weekend. We have Friday night action between Cincinnati and BYU in Provo, and then a slate of games on Saturday, multiple 2:30 kickoffs. So the national TV network showing the Big 12 a little bit of love this weekend. We got Kansas and Texas, two 4-0 teams, both ranked in the top 25, kicking off at 2:30 on ABC. You've got Houston and Texas Tech at 2:30 on FS2, which Anthony kindly noted before our recording that did not know FS2 existed. I also forgot about FS2, but if you are absolutely bored and need something to do, you got Houston and Texas Tech on FS2, and then FS1, Baylor and UCF there. Uh, UCF off to a pretty good start this year, looking to move to 4-1, and Baylor looking to bounce back after a pretty disastrous home loss against Texas. And then night game action in Norman as Oklahoma hosts Iowa State. Sooners were played pretty tough at Cincinnati last weekend, but came out with a 20-6 win to stay unbeaten on the season. So right now, only 3 teams in the Big 12 are currently undefeated. We've got Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. I'm really excited for that Kansas Texas game. Kansas could really make a statement this weekend as a contender for the Big 12 championship. I know Kansas last year got off to a really hot start as well, but then TCU wins that game. Jalen Daniels gets injured, and then the season kind of gets all squirrely for the Jayhawks after that. So, Anthony, any thoughts on the Big 12 slate this weekend? What teams are you looking to make some noise this weekend?
I'm excited for that late night Friday night game, Cincinnati and Provo. I think it's fun to have Big 12 football kind of all throughout the day. I know that's one of the things Brett Yormark kind of harped on is spreading the conference from across time zones. So yeah, I think it's like 9:15 p.m. on Friday night. So you get to stay up late, watch some Big 12 football, and one of those teams will get their first Big 12 conference win. So I think there's a lot of excitement there. In our pick'em post that went up this week for the staff picks, I was the only one to select Cincinnati. So I think the Bearcats go in there and put up a fight in Provo and come away with the win. But I think that's a really exciting game. And then yeah, I guess maybe I'm just feeling a little bit defeatist about what Texas is going to do and is doing this season that I'm not terribly excited about the Kansas Texas game. I think Texas probably handles business relatively easily. Jalen Daniels and Devin Neal, they can make some magic happen, but I don't know. I'm not this wagon that Texas is on. I think it's rolling. So I'm worried about that one there. And yeah, Oklahoma's going to roll easy. The Texas Tech Houston game, I think, is kind of just interesting. Houston has been quite bad, but Texas Tech has also been quite bad despite high expectations. So, one of them gets back on the right track here, but I think Tech really has to turn that season around. I mean, I think they got to feel like so disappointed with where things stand. And then Baylor traveling to UCF in the rematch of the old Fiesta Bowl, where Blake Bortles took care of the Bears a few years ago. Man, Baylor, it's been looking rough. I think Baylor has a better chance of winning this game than we've all given them credit for. I think Baylor still has some dudes and still has a roster that can make things happen, but UCF has looked really good, and I've been impressed with them. So I think UCF takes it. It's a fun slate. With Kansas State and Oklahoma State on bye this week, get to sit back and watch the carnage they do. So I think that are we going to leave this week with any thoughts different about where the Big 12 stands? I don't think so. I think Oklahoma rolls pretty easily. The only one that really has a chance to shake things up is if Kansas takes care of Texas, which would be a big shakeup nationally, a big shakeup to the conference, certainly. But outside of that, I don't think we're moving the needle too much on where things stand in the conference rankings.
Texas Tech and Houston this weekend is kind of the Oklahoma State, Iowa State game this week. I know I joked last week that I don't know who would want to watch that game between the Cowboys and the Cyclones last week, but it turned out to be really entertaining. And Iowa State had its best offensive performance in quite some time, so maybe this Texas Tech Houston game will be more entertaining than I'll give those two teams credit for. And then Oklahoma State, I think if any team needs a bye week right now, it's probably Oklahoma State to get things settled and figure out what direction you're going to go in for the remainder of the season, because it's been really rough. I mean, I don't think anybody would have predicted Oklahoma State to be at the bottom of the Big 12, but I mean, you could argue that they've been the worst team in the conference so far this year, and that's just not it's not normal to see Oklahoma State struggle the way that it has this year and even last season. I mean, this is a team that was a play away from making it deep into the postseason not too long ago. So it remains to be seen what's going to be happening in Stillwater, whether or not Mike Gundy's seat is going to be warming up. But we will see what happens this weekend in the Big 12. And speaking of the Big 12, we will transition here from football into some basketball news. I know we are still a ways away from basketball, but the Big 12 did release its conference schedules for both the men's and women's programs in the conference. Both of these TCU teams on the men's side and the women's side have made some serious roster changes. I mean, starting with the women's program, you have Mark Campbell coming in from Sacramento State. He's taking over for Reagan Peebley, who was the head coach at TCU for almost a decade. Really renowned coach in recruiting circles, had a lot of experience at the University of Oregon as an assistant prior to coaching at Sacramento State and now TCU. Some big time players coming in from Power 5 programs. You have Sedona Prince coming in from Oregon, the 6'7" center. You have Madison Connor coming in from Arizona, Una Jovanovic coming in from Cal State Fullerton, multiple other new faces as well. And then on the men's side, I know we've talked about the Frogs hitting the transfer portal pretty hard going back to the winter with guys like Jameer Nelson coming in from Delaware and Avery Anderson from Oklahoma State. Isam Mustafa from Coastal Carolina, Ernest Uday, who I think has a chance to be a big breakout performer for TCU coming in from Kansas late in the transfer portal cycle, or there were some reports, or maybe he was going to go to Duke, and that just never seemed to materialize. And then all of a sudden he commits to TCU, and the Frogs get a huge addition to the roster. Not to mention Jace Posey coming in, a 4-star freshman, and then Isaiah Manning, a really talented 3-star player. So, Anthony, looking at these schedules, starting with the men, what are the exciting matchups here, and which games are you looking most forward to once we get into the winter?
Yeah, man. The basketball schedule in the Big 12, both men's and women's, is just, it's a gauntlet. It's elite. Every game is terrific. So I'm pumped for all of them. I think it's going to be must watch television every night. So I mean, TCU, the men's, uh, they start off conference play against Kansas in Lawrence. So, and I think that Kansas will probably be preseason number one, maybe number two or three. Definitely a preseason top five. They will probably be a top five-ish team when that game happens. It's the big game on CBS on a Saturday afternoon. It is that is a huge game that TCU went up there and handled the Jayhawks in Allen Fieldhouse a year ago. It's a very, very difficult place to play, but
Mm.
excited to see what this TCU roster can go do against that Kansas team. And then you've got a week later, you host Houston, a number one seed last year, a Sweet 16 team that has been consistently one of the best teams in college basketball. Um, uh, Certainly recent history, long-term program history. So that is, man, the Schallmeyer is going to be absolutely rocking on Saturday night on January 13th for that Houston game. You get the home and home with Baylor, including the game in Schallmeyer being a big Monday on ESPN feature game. I think that's super exciting. You get a back-to-back home slate at the January February turn where you get Texas Tech and then Texas coming in to Schallmeyer. Man, it's just it's hard to think that, oh, this feels so close, but it's coming up soon. I'm excited for it. I think getting through this non-conference schedule, TCU's non-conference schedule I think is pretty light this year, and maybe it's been light for the last few years. TCU gets Georgetown, Clemson, Arizona State, not a whole lot of huge names in the non-conference or huge like preseason non-conference tournaments to participate in, but once you hit that conference schedule, every single night is just an absolute banger in the conference.
Yeah, I don't mind TCU having a lighter non-conference this year when you consider the teams that the Frogs are going to be playing in conference. And I think the Big 12 last year was arguably the best, if not the best, basketball conference in the country. And now you're adding Houston on top of that, in addition to the other new schools coming in, and it's only going to get better from here because in the near future we're going to have Arizona coming in, among others. So Big 12 basketball is going to be highly competitive this year. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch. So if y'all want any more details on the schedule releases, you can check out our website at frogsaward.com. We have articles posted about both of the schedule releases, and you could always go to gofrogs.com as well and check out the full schedules. Anthony, any final thoughts here on anything that we've covered this evening before we go ahead and transition out of here?
Yeah, just for on the women's schedule, I mean, the Big 12, I think that I'm excited to see what this new era of TCU women's basketball is going to be. I think there's a big opportunity for, considering how incredible every single program is at TCU across the board. Women's basketball has maybe been the one that's lagged behind a little bit.
Mhm.
And so I think that there's been a lot of resources put into women's basketball, a lot of support from the university administration, from the athletic department, and that program has every opportunity to move forward into the new Big 12 as a competitive contending team, and I'm excited to see that journey take place. And on the schedule, Texas will be an excellent team again, and Baylor will be an excellent team again, and you get those games. I don't think TCU gets Baylor at home in the women's schedule. I'm trying to look through it now. Maybe not, but does get Texas in Shawmeyer. So those are big time women's basketball games, and we saw last year how kind of the NCAA tournament went in the women's side, where it became one of the stories of sports, of really of a nationwide story, watching the end of how that season played out. And I think it'll be exciting for TCU to be a real part of that. I think this season, I think there's plenty to be excited about for TCU women's basketball, and big time matchups that folks should definitely get out to Shawmeyer to check out some games.
Yeah, definitely agree about reflecting on last year and all of the success that all of these TCU programs had. And you could argue that it was the most successful 365 days in the history of TCU sports, with all of the conference championships and national championship appearances from all these programs. And women's basketball was kind of an afterthought. And it was unfortunate, really, what happened with the program post COVID. I think the program pre COVID was in a position to have a lot of success. And I believe TCU was
That
going to
2020
qualify.
team, yeah, that 2020 team was definitely going to be in the NCAA tournament. Yes.
Yeah, that team had a winning record and was positioned to make it into the tournament and possibly break off some kind of a run. But then the pandemic happened, and it just seemed like the program never really recovered from that. And Reagan Peebley departed with a career winning record and brought a lot to the women's program throughout her time at TCU. But Mark Campbell coming in, I think his track record speaks for itself. His roots go back to Oregon. I know a couple of the assistants that he has brought in also have roots that go back to Oregon, and his ability to deliver results right away has shown with some of these players that he has brought over from Oregon and Arizona, and Agnes Emma Nopu from Stanford. He's brought in, I believe, 5 transfer portal players with a lot of talent at different positions. So really excited to see if this program can turn it around. I think with this talent that's coming in, if all of these players, much like the men's team, with all of these new players coming in, if they can gel together and get it figured out during the early portion of the season with some of those lighter non-conference games, both of these programs have a chance to be really successful this year. So that'll be in the somewhat distant future. We have football obviously right now, but it's always exciting to give a little bit of a preview into what's going to be coming up with basketball. So with all of that, we will go ahead and sign off for the evening. Again, this was our midweek episode. We appreciate all of you listening in and continuing to support us on the Frogs Up TCU Sports Podcast, as well as Frogs of War. Continue to follow us at frogsofwar.com. Be sure to also follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Frogs of War. Again, Charlie Hustle, Vintage Made Fresh. Use your promo code Frogs of War or 101215. On it, athlete, get on those TCU football trading cards that are coming out October 2nd. Pre-sales are available. Check out our socials for more information about that. And consider donating to the Patreon if you want to support the 1012 Network or the two of us here on Frogs Up. Go to patreon.com/1012 Network. That'll do it for this evening. I am Russ Hodges. That is Anthony North. And we will sign off with a Frogs Up.
Frogs up.